The Trump family might be in a little bit of trouble when it comes to some of their financial disclosures, and that is that the group that has represented them for some time, Mazars, has apparently decided that they're gonna go their own way, so to speak. Now, the Trump family wants to sort of preempt some bad news that we're gonna discuss, has been coming out throughout this week, by going on the offensive against the legal cases that have been advancing against them. So Eric Trump took to Twitter yesterday to tweet on Thursday, our team will be in front of a New York judge outlining the blatantly unethical behavior of Tish James, the New York Attorney General. There are 81 pages of videos, tweets, and fundraising solicitations, some as recent as 2 weeks ago, in our lawsuit for the judge to see. I don't know what pages of videos means. Is it screenshots? Is it headlines? I don't know what you're talking about there. But anyway, their thing is, it doesn't matter what's revealed. It doesn't matter what developments there are in the cases that are advancing against the Trump family. Tish James is biased, which, by the way, you can make a case that perhaps she is. She certainly doesn't seem to like the Trump family, but that hardly puts her in exclusive company. There are a lot of people who don't like the Trump family. That doesn't fundamentally stop facts from being facts. So let's talk about some facts. Let's talk about some of the developments that have happened just this week. So Mazars USA, the accounting firm that has represented the whole Trump thing for some time, they said in a letter to the Trump Organization dated about a week ago that annual financial statements it prepared for Trump from 2011 to 2020, quote, should no longer be relied upon. So almost a decade of financial statements. And for something like the Trump Organization, a decade of financial statements for a group that big is going to be a lot of material, a lot of work that many people have been involved in. They're now done with that, basically. They say, while we have not concluded that the various financial statements as a whole contain material discrepancies, based upon the totality of the circumstances, we believe our advice to you to no longer rely upon those financial statements is appropriate. It said that it concluded that the statements are no longer reliable based on part on the Attorney General's earlier filings. This is Tish James, which we were just talking about. Its own investigations and information the accountants received from, quote, internal and external sources. The letter added that Mazars performed its work in accordance with professional standards. So was to have their accounting firm back off of a decade of financial records is fairly significant, I think.
There's just so much to unpack here. You wonder what the level of scrutiny of most of these bigger corporate entities, financial statements, what type of scrutiny they actually ever receive in the first place. If all Donald Trump and his organization had to do was just say, yeah, no, it's worth like this much. That's it. I don't need to provide any proof of this. I can just tell you, and it's fine. And by the way, I think it's mighty convenient that now that the police are knocking at the door, that this accounting firm is just like, nah, we take it back. We don't stand by those statements we said for 10 years. We take it back, completely retracted. We don't think it was accurate. Which again, that's just a hilarious unfolding of events. And then, just the general Donald Trump and his whole family are a bunch of grifters, and almost every single person within his orbit is a grifter, scammer, con artist. This is just more proof to that fact.
Yeah, it certainly seems to move in that direction. Now, I'm gonna give more information, but I wanna make clear that this is again the sort of development that will lead to a lot of headlines of a variety of people coming being like, oh, the walls are closing in. No, the walls are not moving. I don't think they're, now this doesn't look good for them, certainly. But that does not mean that you should be like, they'll be in jail by Thursday. No, they're probably not gonna be. This is not good for them, but this by itself isn't gonna, throw them in jail. I believe it can only serve as a representation of something that the NYAG has found that Mazars now wants to distance themselves from because they're worried about potential consequences. And bear in mind, they're accountants. Now they're rich and all of that. So in America, they're relatively insulated from legal consequences as well, but they weren't president a bit ago, so less insulated than Donald Trump is. But when they say, for instance, let's see, they received information from, quote, internal and external sources, that could mean so many different things. The external sources could be investigators working for the New York Attorney General. It could be that they have found information that doesn't comply with what Mazars had been reporting for a number of years. The internal sources could be people working for the Trump organization that are now revealing that they either purposefully or were led to lie about some of these numbers. But again, we don't know for sure. And I also was, as a person who I don't need an entire accounting firm to do my taxes, I would have assumed that Mazars would be making sure that things are true. But I guess that's not necessarily how it works. They might have executives at the Trump organization giving them information. They have to assume perhaps that some of that is true. That could be where the gap comes about. But again, that's outside of the experience of, I think, basically everyone watching this video right now.
Yeah, 100%. If accounting firm as prominent as Mazars is like, it's fine, just let it through, that means this is just a standard practice. If it was something that was completely out of step with how you file your financial statements for companies of this size, then they probably wouldn't do it, because the number one rule in corporate culture, John, is always cover your own ass. That's that's standard operating procedure wherever you go, as far as corporate wise. And another thing that people need to understand is that none of this is actually news. This all came out like 6 years ago during the Trump campaign, right? So in 2016, when Donald Trump was running for president, like New York Times did a big expose about like, sort of the shady financial dealings of Donald Trump and his family, going back to what his dad was doing. So it's not as if any of this stuff is news or that it's new information. I think there's just a different spin on it, because it seems like finally, maybe perhaps law enforcement might be willing to, at the very least, give this guy and his organization a slap on the wrist for being such perpetual fraudsters.
Yeah. Like massive fraud that has generally gone without consequences. Not exclusively, like there was, Trump University, they got in trouble for that. Some of their charity stuff they got in trouble for. But like, who doesn't believe that they were artificially inflating and deflating their valuations of things when they would inflate it when they needed it to back some sort of loan they were trying to get? They would deflate it in other, like everybody knows that they were doing that. The thing is, they're incredibly powerful, rich people. So it just takes forever to make any headway. This is not, if you were doing this sort of stuff, it would not be a 20-year process of investigating it. But when they're powerful, it just takes forever. Like we were talking about with Matt Gaetz like a week ago. They got access to his phone 2 Decembers ago, and they won't say whether there's anything there or not. It just takes so long, and that can make this very frustrating. And that's one more reason why I don't want people out there, like we think this is important, that's why we're covering. We wanna make sure that you know what's happening. But I don't want you to infuse too much emotion into an outcome that might never come, or at the very least might be incredibly delayed in finally getting here.
Wait, John, you mean to tell me you don't want to make your show about what could potentially maybe happen in a Trump conspiracy theory that might be unfolding but might not? But wait, there's another clue right there. You don't want to do that with your show, John?
That sounds fun, actually, when you put it that way. Okay, maybe he's going to jail by this weekend. Maybe. Anyway, by the way, it's only fair for us to give a response, not just from Eric Trump, but from the Trump organization. So take a look at this spin. You might want to slow down the stream so that you can see the spin a little bit better. So the statements, hold on. A Trump organization spokesperson told Axios that Mazars' letter, which we just discussed, which involves Mazars being like, peace out, we're done, don't have any faith in those documents we sent you. They say that the letter indicates its, quote, work was performed in accordance with all applicable accounting standards and principles, and that such statements of financial condition do not contain any material discrepancies. This confirmation effectively renders the investigations by the DA and the AG moot. So what they're saying is, in the letter that's announcing that they say, oh, you know those 10 years of financial disclosures? Nah, I don't know what's up with those. That actually isn't just not terrible, but means the investigations shouldn't continue. I don't know how that works. I don't know, but they're very optimistic people over there working for that PR company.
I mean, isn't that the point of all PR is positive spin at every single turn? But yeah, but I do think, honestly, John, as you mentioned, this is something worth watching because these are legitimate crimes, and especially when it depends on who you're committing the crimes against. Now, if you're defrauding institutions, in order to receive loans, like you might actually have to pay for that. You stiff a couple of union contracts, all right, nobody cares.
That is definitely the case. That is how it works. And bear in mind, in terms of the end game for this, I'll close on this note. The investigation, there are multiple investigations against Trump, but the one that we're talking about here, which is taking place in New York by the Attorney General Tish James, that is a civil investigation. So supposedly nothing immediately in terms of criminal charges can come from this, although revelations could lead to another investigation that would take 3 to 10 years that could have criminal charges. This cannot. She can seek financial penalties, which in theory could do damage to or shut down the Trump organization. Maybe someday, I don't know. But it's not gonna end up with him being, like thrown in a jail cell or anything like that. No, you only end up in trouble with cops if what you steal costs less than $50. Then it's a serious crime. If it's above that, it's purely civil. Let's be civil to each other.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.